Yesterday, President Trump reminded the world of his avowed intent to bully them into starkly unequal relations with the United States. He sent letters to numerous trading partners with new headline tariff rates, updated from the previous high tariff rates that he stunned the world with on his big reveal back on April the 2nd. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent summarised the letters like this: "Thank you for wanting to trade with the United States of America. We welcome you as a trading partner, and here's the rate, unless you want to come back and try to negotiate." For some countries, the rate had come down. Very slightly. For others, it was the same, still others, maybe even a slight increase. They were all still high figures, whose principal purpose was to motivate them to seek a deal with the United States that might get them reduced. Now, you'll recall that was supposed to be happening over the last 90 days. There were going to be 90 deals in 90 days, they promised. Now it's in 113 days, but this time they mean it. Honestly, well, probably. So far, they have a sort of deal with the United Kingdom and a sort of deal with Vietnam. No deal really with China, but an agreement to de-escalate from what had been the escalated situation between them. This was always part of the plan. It's a pretty basic plan, not exactly 4D chess, as his supporters would have you believe. Hit countries with absurd high rates on the assumption that they need the US more than the US needs them. Force them to the table, make the most outrageous, egregiously one-sided demands you can think of to give the US favourable terms and hence enable it to continue its global economic dominance. Very much like the head of an empire, demanding more and more tribute from the farthest subjugated peoples. Then, when they fight back, because their own people would be damaged by such a one-sided deal, their political futures would probably be in doubt if they went back bearing such a deal, then you create a new headline moment, the announcement of another tariff figure, different enough to make it another news story, maybe even higher for the countries that are the biggest holdouts. And then you extend the deadline by a bit, enough to keep the time pressure on and to keep everything revolving around Trump. Although the deadline is now August the 1st, Financial Times observed that Scott Bessent often refers to September the 1st. And it said this: like the president himself, the administration's deadlines have to be taken seriously, but not literally. Seriously, because if Trump should decide to enforce a deadline, the impact could be seismic. Not literally, because he probably won't. And that's the formula. Everyone is focused on one man who might or might not do something that utterly devastates their country at the drop of a hat. So those who complain, why does everyone talk about Trump all the time these days? Well, that's why. And it's the entire purpose of his approach, backed up by the economic and military might of the United States. Is it worth countries caving to the pressure in order to buy stability and predictability, even at the cost of a disadvantaged rate? Well, if you're paying attention, you'd have to conclude a whole bunch of no to that question. Stability and predictability don't serve Trump's interests. Trump insists on keeping everyone else off balance, driving home any and every advantage. And like any bully, or extortionist more accurately, early success almost certainly followed by going back for more. So all that can be agreed in this truncated timescale is a very broad framework agreement, not actually full detailed and negotiated trade deals. And that suits Trump perfectly well, because the winner-takes-all deal-making playbook is that once you've got the other side conceding to the broad terms of a deal, when you get into the detail, you push a bit further and a bit further. You revise definitions that the other side believed they already knew what they meant. You add new demands on supplementary issues. Having believed that they'd made progress, that they'd gotten to the end, it adds to the pressure on the other side if a threat is then raised to snatch all that away. It's the human psychology of predator versus prey. and it's inhabiting the leadership of the most powerful country in the world. And this is the point. These deals don't follow a set of stable and understandable guidelines or rules. They follow the whims of the man who must be at the centre of attention at all costs. That's what keeps him at the centre of attention, because he has cultivated the chaos, the sense that he could do anything at any moment. There is no response that is going to be acceptable to Trump other than ongoing capitulation. Now, you might think that countries could decide to take the hit, to accept the tariff and just start organising their societies to collaborate with each other and remove their ongoing dependency and vulnerability to the United States. But that is seen as anti-America. Certainly not going to be tolerated by the White House. We saw the clearest expression of that yesterday when Trump announced he would bring in an additional 10% tariff aimed at all countries that align themselves with the BRICS coalition. The BRICS countries, originally comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now joined by a number of others, they just held a 2-day summit. BRICS summits have previously investigated options, for example, for replacing the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Trump had previously sounded the alarm at that notion, threatening to impose a 100% tariff against any country that tried to do such a thing. And so he behaves in a way most likely to push countries away from the US, while telling them that they will attract particular punishment if they follow the logic of that pushing and seek to actually walk away. This isn't America first. It isn't even America alone. It's America as the global empire, forcing tributes from vassal states across the world. Now, weirdly, not all countries are fans of this new concept. I know, the ingratitude. The BRICS hosting Brazilian President Lula da Silva commented, "The world has changed. We don't want an emperor." Obviously, he doesn't know how his empire business works. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said tariffs should not be used as a tool for coercion and pressuring. The BRICS advocates for win-win cooperation. It does not target any country. This understanding of the mutual benefit of trade is, of course, how the US used to see the world, and exactly how it became the hub of the world economy, with the most powerful performing national economy of any country. In the short term, however, that now has given it leverage to exploit others. In the longer term, as the consequences of that betrayal feed through into a degraded US world position and economy, well, Trump will have gone by then, so who cares? I mean, if anything's going to dent his reputation at home, it's more likely to be MAGA hitting the brick wall of having been fed expectations of the Epstein files, only to eventually be told that there are no such files. Because obviously that's way more important than depressing the global economy, causing poverty in numerous countries unnecessarily, and then doing it all over again and again just to feed the ego of one man. Worth noting that the cost of government borrowing worldwide has been surging in response to this recent move as investors assess the impact of all the different options countries now face and don't fancy any of them. Now, many people watching all this from the sidelines will be just wishing that some of these countries could recognise the lose-lose nature of all of this and decide to draw that line anyway. To tell Trump, fine, you do your tariffs. We'll work on transforming our economies to cut America out of it. I would certainly entertain those fantasies from time to time, but such transformation takes decades, realistically. So most will conclude it's still in their interest to play along to try to get the least worst deal that they can. Japan, for instance, which has been slated by the Trump administration for not being willing to just cave in to extravagant demands, the Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba expressed regret over Trump's latest announcement of a 25% tariff, which shouldn't deceive you as to just how affronted the country is by how it's being treated. The governing party's policy chief, Izunori Onodera, said it more plainly. It's unacceptable. It's extremely rude to send only a letter to an allied nation. I strongly resent it. And yet, Japan's chief negotiator said that they would ramp up bilateral discussions to reach a mutually beneficial package by the new deadline of August the 1st. Well, it could be that they still hope, given that Japan does a lot of trade with the US, that its size and economic reach will mean that they can persuade the Americans to settle for mutually beneficial, even though that's clearly not the current intention. Maybe they're right. Can't blame them for trying. But of course, in so doing, they feed the Trump ego machine exactly what it wants. So good luck with that, I guess. Also, going by the comments on the Japan Today news story on this, the citizenry are not impressed with the results to date of appeasing Trump, and they are, to say the least, keen on a more robust approach. And that sentiment matters as well. The EU, for its part, is trying to get a deal, but is also unlikely to accept the one-sided Trumpian sort. Germany's Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil warned today that the EU will retaliate against US tariffs if it can't get such a fair deal. As an obvious pushback to the terms that are presumably being offered behind closed doors, he said this: "We want an agreement with the Americans, but I also say very clearly that this deal must be fair." The problem, of course, is that if your counterpart has hallucinations that arrangements that were considered perfectly fair in the past were actually egregiously ripping him off, then at some point you just have to confront the reality that you're working with different definitions of what the word fair means. The EU was not one of the entities that got one of Trump's letters yesterday. Whether that's a good sign for them or not, who knows? On the downside for them, the EU can talk tough, and as the UK can testify, its negotiators are tough, but it is a coalition of 27 countries with very different perspectives and very different appetites for risk. And they get a double hit. Mostly they are NATO members who have just, at America's insistence by the way, committed to much higher defence spending. But then, at the exact same time, Trump's tariffs are reducing their trade, making their cost of borrowing more expensive, and hence opening up huge holes in their budgets. But the only logical substantive pushback to Trump is likely to come from emerging superpower China. China is more concerned about the fact that Trump's deals are clearly seeking to pressure all of these other countries to reduce their dealings with China, or indeed to exclude it altogether from their supply chains, which is a direct attack on its interests, and indeed its position in the world, and indeed its ability to be an alternative channel for those seeking to get out from under the imperial yoke. China, which you may recall does happen to have a near monopoly on crucial rare earth minerals, issued a warning today against Trump ramping up trade attacks against it, saying that it will retaliate against countries that agree to his terms. The more the presidential ego demands chaos and uncertainty to keep itself at that centre of attention, the more powerful will be China's arguments to be the more stable and predictable alternative trade partner. In that sense, it will see opportunity for its goal of rising as a world power at America's expense. The US alienates allies, drives them away from being embedded and dependent upon it. That creates the perfect ground for China's seeds to grow. It's just the most obvious way that Trump's actions backfire on the United States. There are so many others if you look for them.